Okay, in this section, I'm going to talk to you about the blending modes in Substance. Actually, the official website already explains this very clearly, but a lot of people might have trouble finding where it is. So here, I'll just quickly show you how to find it. So, what exactly is this thing used for? Let's take a look together. Let's check it out. For example, let's create a new one. Let's look at the first one. The first mode is called copy. Copy is actually pretty simple. For example, let's say we use a certain shape, a file with two shapes. One is like this, and the other one is like this. So about editing, what about copy? The copy mode is actually really simple. If the opacity is set to 1, it shows our foreground. If the opacity is 0, it shows our background. If the opacity is somewhere in the middle, it shows half foreground and half background. That's basically what it means. But pay attention to one thing. If we're in copy mode, if you add something called if you add something like an alpha map, okay, then what happens in this case? For example, when our copy value is 1, then within the alpha range, within the white area of the opacity, it will display our line. No matter what, then in the black area of the alpha, it will show our background. It's just that simple. And the second one, what's it called? It's even simpler. Add, just add together. For example, if we lower the value inside a bit, right? If we add them first, you can see it, right? It's basically the value of our image. Look, here it's 0.553, and here it's around 0.8. When you add the two together, it goes over 1. See, in this area, our the V value has already exceeded 1. So this is just addition, simply adding the black and white values together. Okay, next we'll do subtract. Subtract first, which just means doing subtraction, right? Remember, it's foreground minus background, foreground minus background. Let's switch things up a bit here. Let's cross out this line, okay? You can see here, this is our foreground. The foreground is this part here, and we subtract this background thing. So the area in between gets subtracted out, right? The minimum value is 0, even though it could go negative, the minimum is 0, so this part gets subtracted and turns black. So the values for white and black basically represent 1 and 0. When you multiply them together, there really isn't much of a distinction between foreground and background. Yeah, so when you multiply them, you can see here that our white value is 0.9 and the black value is 0.5, right? So when you multiply them, 0.9 times 0.5, just now it was 0.53, now it's 0.52, right? It's basically taking all the 0.5 values in our background and multiplying them by a value that goes from 0.9 down to 0. This creates a gradient like this. Generally, multiplying like this is used for areas of an image that need to be darkened, because any value multiplied by a number between 0 and 1 will always be less than 1, right? For example, 1 times 0.1 equals 0.1, and 0.1 times 0.1 equals 0.01, right? So when we're trying to darken something, using multiplication like this works. As for add and subtract, these are also pretty simple. What does add mean? Here, it says that when the foreground is greater than 0.5, we add. When the foreground is less than 0.5, we subtract. Basically, when our foreground is greater than 0.5, so roughly in this range, right here, when it's above 0.5, it gets added to our background. So in this area, it's all about addition. And then after 0.5, after 0.5, for example, when it drops to 0.4 or 0.3, let's focus on this versus value. Once it goes below 0.4 or 0.3, it turns into subtraction. So the overall range gets shortened because in those farther areas, subtraction is being applied. And over here, in the middle part, addition is being performed. That is, in our Excel, when the foreground is above 0.5, it gets added to the background. Foreground above 0.5. When the pixel value of the foreground is below 0.5, then subtraction happens. That's what it means. Now, Mark Satan or Mark Slangton is something we use very often. What does it mean? Let me explain briefly. Basically, it compares the black and white values of two images. Compares them. It will give priority to displaying one over the other. So for the brighter parts, for example, at this pixel position in the image, if our foreground image is brighter, then the foreground image will be displayed. If the background image is brighter, then the background image will be displayed. So in this case, in the middle area here, our foreground image is shown, and in the rest, the background image is displayed, because in the middle, the foreground image is brighter than the background image. Okay, now about min. What does the darker mode do? With darker or darken, it basically means that between the foreground and background, it will choose the darker part to display. What does that mean? It means that for a pixel in the foreground, for example, if this pixel is brighter and another pixel is darker, then in this middle area, the background will be displayed, because in the central area, the background is darker than the foreground. However, at the edges, the foreground is actually darker than the background, so at the edges, the foreground will be displayed. Basically, it's like comparing these two values. Then we display whichever part is darker. So as you can see, in the middle area, it's all 0.53, right? So what's displayed in the middle is this 0.53. The Stucker switch, well, the switch here is actually similar to, what do you call it? Copy. Yeah, it's pretty similar to copy, but we actually use it less often. Generally, we use copy more because switch doesn't really have the opacity channel. Actually, maybe it does. Well, it seems like switch is something we rarely use. Honestly, we don't use switch much. Usually, using copy is enough for us. So we don't really worry about it here. There's a whole bunch of explanations, but we just ignore them. Divide means division. When you use divide, the whole image looks kind of weird. It gets brighter because it's basically dividing the two values. But division isn't always easy to calculate. For example, any value divided by 0, right? It divides by 0. It all equals this, this, this. But if you have a really small value, like 1 divided by 0.1, that's basically like multiplying by 10. So it gets a lot brighter. Hey, is that right? Let me check with a calculator. You said 1 divided by 0.1, and that's 10, right? So with division, the smaller the number you divide by, like the darker the value, it gets brighter. The brighter the value you divide by, the darker it becomes. For example, 1 divided by 0.9 equals about 1.111. So you get this kind of effect. The center, since it's brighter, will actually get darker, and the darker areas will become even brighter. So it's basically using an expansion algorithm, which we actually don't use very often out of all these fabric materials because this division operation is a bit tricky to calculate. But this next method is used a lot, overlays. What does overlay mean? It basically compares two values at a time. If the value in the image is higher than 0.5, it will perform a multiplication operation. If it's less than 0.5, it will perform a screen operation. As for the multiplication, you all probably know about that, right? It definitely makes things darker, since, after all, you're multiplying by a value. Another number between 0 and 1 will definitely make the image darker, so that middle area will definitely be a bit darker than before. Even if you can't really tell, it is a little darker. Then, for values less than 0.5, for example, starting from here and going onward, they use the screen operation. So what is screen? It's a function that applies to image variables, meaning it'll affect the entire image. Because of this variable, when we use an overlay in this situation, the middle part will get a bit darker while the edges will get a bit brighter. This matches what we expect. Alright, so now let's talk about screen. Screen, screen, screen. This value is actually pretty simple. There's an algorithm for it, which is to take our value here. Basically, what it does is invert our value, then multiply the inverted values together, and after that, invert the result again. That's basically what it means. It's a bit hard to understand, not so easy to put into a formula. For example, let's say we have image A. So you take image A, invert it, and then multiply it by image B. Then you invert it again and add image B. So after you invert it, the final result is that the image gets brighter. You should know that the screen mode is used to brighten the image. We can see this directly, like in image A, wherever it's bright, that's where A will show through. When you add this brightness, the dark areas basically stay the same because those parts are already very dark, right? But there will still be a slight change in brightness around the edges. It's just that our eyes can't really notice it. So how is this different from add? With add, the increase is much more intense. It will directly and forcefully add the numbers together, while screen is a much softer blending mode. That's all you really need to know about it. Okay, now soft light. This is another mode. So, what about soft light? This mode also adjusts the contrast of the image. Basically, when your brightness is over 50%, it will apply a certain effect to your colors. This. Blend color. If that's more than 50%, it will lighten. So basically, when you use soft light, it means that when the brightness of your foreground image is higher than 50%, it will slightly brighten that area of your background image. But if the brightness is lower than 50%, for example, when it's below 50% here, it will slightly darken your background image. That's basically what it means. Take a look, right? So it's like in a way it increases the contrast of the image, right? You see this area gets lighter, this area gets darker. As for these blend modes, that's pretty much all there is to it. All right, it's pretty simple. In our what do you call this? In SG, that's all there is to it. It's that simple. Which blend modes are a bit harder to understand? One of them is overlay, which might be a bit tricky. So take a closer look at this. I'll stop the screenshot here and you can check it out for yourself later. Then soft light might also be a bit hard to understand. And what else? There's also add and subtract. These might be easier to grasp. For add and subtract, it's about the pixel value in 0.5. Add to background basically means adding to the background, while subtract is from the perspective of the background, essentially. Yeah, let's talk a bit more about add and subtract. Right, I probably didn't explain it clearly. Basically, it's about our engine image. When the value is higher than 0.5, it will be added. The part in the middle above 0.5, you can see that the area above 0.5 will be added to our background image. And then, when the foreground color value is below 0.5, it will be subtracted from their respective background pixel. In other words, when it's below 0.5, it gets darker. Just think of it that way. 0.5 is the dividing line. When it's below 0.5, it darkens our background image. When it's above 0.5, it brightens our background image. Just remember this principle. In our actual applications, I'll explain to everyone later why we use this, right? Why do we need it? Yeah, some variables make it a bit darker. Actually, both of these things adjust the contrast of our image. It's just that one of them changes the contrast more aggressively, right? And the other one is less intense. That's all there is to it. All right, hey,